Jared, welcome to Get Leaner and Live Longer. So glad to have you here. This is going to be fun.
I'm excited to be here and especially excited to talk about this topic. We're going to have a good time.
Yeah, I've been really excited to talk a little bit more about toxicity and detoxification and like, is that possible and how we go about that? But for people who are not aware of you or Vitality Nutrition or even the nutrition shop, which your parents started back in 77, could you give us a little background on who you are and how you came to be in the position you're in right now?
Yeah, you bet. I grew up in a health food store, quite literally. My parents opened the store that I'm standing in now, recording this 48 years ago. We've been in a few locations since then, but the same shop. As you said, it started out as called Nutrition Shop, and this is in 1977 when it wasn't a smart idea to open up a health food store. People were
Very fringe.
not very into this stuff. There was no such thing as Whole Foods or any of these other places back then. Organic was barely a word people even understood what that might mean. So it was very much a passion project. It was always a side hustle for my dad. He actually always had a full-time job that he did to support the family. Also in the nutrition industry, he worked in for supplement companies and then owned his own supplement company for the last 30 or so years of his life. And but I got super passionate about it. I grew up, doing everything from dumping the trash to labeling bottles and pricing things and that kind of thing. And when I was 15, my parents turned the store over to me. Neither one of them had enough time to do it, so I was managing it at 15 years old. It was just this little, what would we have, 600 square feet or something at that point, and selling vitamins, herbs, and things like that. And I got the fire, man. I just love it. It's been my life's work ever since. I bought the store from them about 30 years ago, and now I own a supplement company where I manufacture products that I sell to stores like mine and to practitioners and chiropractors and things like that. And then have my store, my website, and my podcast. So that's how I got started, just very organically. Pardon the pun.
Legit. All right. So, and is the name of your supplement brand also Vitality Nutrition?
That's right. Yeah,
Okay.
Vitality Nutrition is the supplement brand, is the website, and is the store, and then my podcast is Vitality Radio.
Okay, perfect. It's nice to keep them all kind of like tied in together like that.
Yeah.
It's perfect. Cool, man. So you're celebrating 48 years. So I'm sure since you've been in the industry for so long, you've literally seen it all. You've seen the trends up and down, the things come and go. We were keto for a little bit, and that fell off, and now it's keto again. What are some like? Can you give me like some of like just like the insider scoop on some of the supplements that you've maybe seen that were like you were like, this is crazy, or maybe you took like that Jack 3D back in the day when it still had the DMAA in it. Like, give me like some of like the insider information, things that have either like been crazy and worked, or you were like, that's just way too out there.
Well, for sure. It's actually interesting because our focus definitely is supplements. So obviously we're aware of the diet trends and keto
Mhm.
and paleo and Mediterranean and all the other carnivore and everything else. But when where our focus has always been supplements, what's interesting is, I can very confidently say I'm old enough to remember when most of the supplements that we sell today weren't on the market yet. Things that you people probably think have been around for decades and decades and decades, like glucosamine sulfate. I remember when that came out. I remember when melatonin wasn't a supplement, or DHEA wasn't a supplement, or I remember when I didn't know what ashwagandha was, which is probably the most well-known herb in the whole industry now. And so a lot of that stuff has come along as demand for supplementation has grown over the years. And as I said, back in the day, it was really just kind of a hustle. There were a few kind of fringe people that were really into what we were doing, but it wasn't mainstream at all. You couldn't find any of this stuff in big box stores like grocery stores and Costco's and stuff like that. And it was all just little independent mom and pop health stores, which ours really still is. But as far as some of the trendy things that have come and gone, probably the biggest area has been weight loss, right? Because everybody's always looking to lose weight. And
Mhm.
whether there's a pharmaceutical trend like FinFin or now Ozempic, or a natural trend, we've seen those things come and go. In supplements, probably the biggest thing that was and you kind of you mentioned something was kind of related to it with DMAA was ephedra. For years, ephedra was on the market, or ephedrine, and it was truly one of the only herbs that actually had really good clinical evidence that it could increase thermogenesis and help us burn fat more efficiently. And in my opinion, it largely eventually ended up becoming outlawed because it was too effective and it was too much competition for the pharmaceutical companies. because there really is no concrete evidence at all that it's harmful, even when it's used incorrectly, unless you really go overboard and use it incorrectly. But eventually that got banned, and the FDA quite literally broke their own laws to ban it. But that's kind of the nature of government and government overreach, I guess, and when it comes to healthcare. So yeah, a lot of that kind of stuff has come and gone. Pro hormones were another thing that were big in the fitness world.
Mm-hmm.
That, and pro hormones are potentially pretty dangerous if they're used incorrectly, right? And so that's one that I think probably some regulation belongs. But for the most part, supplements are pretty darn safe, even if you don't know what you're doing, with some rare exceptions.
The pro hormones were really big when I first started doing personal training back in 2008. That was like all everybody in the gym wanted to talk about.
Yep.
But it seemed like it would had more detrimental effects on people's hormonal levels, like long term, than just like going to the doctor and actually getting your blood done and
Yeah.
potentially getting on like an HRT or something like that. But
Well, the biggest problem with pro hormones is that it was kind of a Wild West thing. All the brands that were selling pro hormones were kind of gray market, if at that, right? They weren't
mm-hmm.
really quite above board. They weren't the normal supplement companies that you could generally trust. And so you had probably a lot of shady players in it anyway. And then you just have the average Joe that's walking into a shop or jumping online to want to buy the thing that doesn't really know how to use it correctly, because pro hormones can be used relatively safely if they're used correctly, but most people didn't have the education to use them correctly. And then that's where you run into trouble with, cramming down your own hormone levels and that sort of thing.
Plus they had crazy names too. It was always like the spookiest names for pro hormones, Spawn and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spawn was one of the biggies. Yeah. Yeah.
Before we get into like the detoxification, because I really want to talk about, I'm just fascinated by the supplement industry and like trends over time. But is it true that the 6 meal a day for quote unquote revving the metabolic furnace in the human body was created by Metrics in the 80s to sell protein as like a whey protein supplement became more popular?
I'm not sure if they actually created it, but they certainly capitalized on it,
Okay.
if nothing else, right? And maybe they did. Around that same time, Bill Phillips was huge with Body for Life, and he was also recommending basically a 6 meal a day thing, with 2 or 3 of those being his Myoplex,
Okay.
meal replacement, right? And of course, Metrics was kind of the original meal replacement in that area, and Phillips kind of came on and essentially cloned what they were doing and put a lot better marketing around it. And I mean, my gosh, Body for Life, probably
But
the
still,
biggest, baddest trend ever in fitness supplementation. I mean, he did some, he made a lot of people really interested in meal replacements, protein powder for the first time. I mean, we're talking, that was back when whey protein was barely even a thing on the market. So they were
right.
pretty big trendsetters for sure.
Back in the day when whey was the cheapest byproduct of the cheese
Right.
manufacturing process,
Mhm.
and today it's the most expensive, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, well, now it's like this big commodity item, and it's interesting because in the supplement world, raw materials, of course, are where everything starts, and so you've got to have the protein powder before you can make the protein shake, and that means just pure whey protein, which comes from a dairy. Or some dairy conglomerate. And yeah, whey protein moves almost like the stock market moves. I mean, it's all over the place. And right now it's at an all-time high. And I anticipate in a year or two, supply will start to catch up again and it'll drop down a little bit. But it does that. And you could watch it like you could watch gold or the S&P 500 or whatever. It's kind of wild. And there isn't probably a supplement that is in more demand right now than just plain old whey protein.
That's interesting. Yeah, I thought the Metrics thing was like the kind of the De Beers idea of like, if you want to buy a wedding ring, you got to spend 3 months. And that was the whole marketing campaign that they capitalized on. And, now that's just like public, like knowledge. That's kind of our collective idea around things. I'm always talking to people who are like 6 meals a day, right? I'm like, maybe.
Well, yeah, and I don't know where your take is on this, but I'm personally not convinced that there is a diet that is perfect for everybody. We have too many variables. And so, as trends have come and gone, and you see people that like heal themselves of autoimmune disease with carnivore, or heal themselves of cancer with keto. I mean, we're talking some pretty extreme stuff there. And then, more, I guess you could call more moderate, but still unique diet approaches like paleo or Mediterranean or things like that. I'm not sure that there's a one size fits all. I've never really felt like nutrition is a one size fits all, whether it's supplementation or diet, because we all have different genetics. We all have all kinds of different inputs in our lives. And I always say the ultimate wild card in health is the person that we're talking about trying to get healthy, right? So it
100%.
just varies a lot from person to person.
Yeah, and like you mentioned genetics, it's like someone who is like all their genetics is 100% Northern European is probably going to have different dietary needs than someone who is like genetically from like the equatorial part of the world, you know? So
Exactly. Yeah.
you're going to have different needs in terms of your like in terms of like the vegetation you're eating and like the things that are in season at the moment. So I think that's a wise take, and I think like it also comes back to one of my favorite parts about nutrition, which is these N1 experiments of just like doing experiments on yourself.
Yeah.
Because I think that when people go into it and being like, keto is the diet, everyone says so, it's the thing, and they glom onto it, and now it's this diet, this lifestyle, but they haven't really tested it. It becomes like a heavier and almost more oppressive that they get it wrong. Where versus if you're like, I'm going to try keto for 3 months, see what it does for me, go into it with an open mind, like trying to like learn from the experience rather
Yeah.
than like treat it like this end all be all. I think that's when you start really learning about yourself, what works for you. And it's also becomes so much more fun that way. So
Yeah, I agreed. You've got to be open to the possibility that whatever you're doing is going to work or might not work for you, right? And if you go in with a very specific, there's I guess there's two different ways to look at it, because the placebo effect is real too, right?
for
So if
sure.
you're buying into something, you're about 40% of results are placebo according to the studies, right? So if you're going to do something like keto for 3 months, I think you ought to believe in what you're doing, but you also need to be open to what your body's telling you as to whether or not it really is a good fit for your body. So I think you go in gung-ho, but with a very open mind about what the possibilities are in terms of what might happen, so that you can shift and find what is going to work for you.
Yeah, that's a good take. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about like detoxification and kind of toxicity in our current environments. Now, a lot of the stuff that we're seeing recently has been talking about not just toxicity in terms of nutrition and like the depletion of nutrients in our soil, but also about EMFs and just like and radiation that we're getting from our phones.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about the major players in the toxicity that we're seeing within human bodies right now, and why is that a problem?
Yeah, the big challenge that we're dealing with is we really do truly live in a dirty world, for lack of a better term. There's more toxins, more man-made chemicals in the environment than, at any previous level. And if we're talking about the United States, which I think is the worst based on everything I've been able to tell in terms of the availability of these chemicals, many of which have been banned in other countries, particularly in the European Union. There's a whole bunch of things that are generally recognized as safe in America, which really doesn't mean anything. There's no real strict guideline that makes something generally recognized as safe. But there's lots of things in America that have that what's called GRAS status, that are illegal in other countries, hundreds and hundreds of those things that are illegal in other countries, because there's enough evidence that they're at least probably not safe, if not definitely not safe. And yet in America, we're living in a chemical stew, and really the whole world, but America tends to be about the worst when it comes to this, just based on the fact that EPA and FDA are pretty much just letting industry dictate what chemicals go on the market. And so what the
Mhm.
big concern I have is how these chemicals are impacting us from an endocrine system standpoint, because there is plenty of evidence that we have a problem when it comes to how our endocrine systems are reacting to these chemicals in terms of the production of our own hormones, and how many of these chemicals, which are hormone mimickers, are literally disrupting and the word disruption is not even a strong enough word. We call them endocrine disrupting chemicals, but really, in many cases, just confusing the hell out of our own systems as to what we're supposed to be producing and when we're supposed to produce it. And then on top of that, where is that hormone going to go? Because the endocrine disrupting chemicals block the receptors at the cell site that allow the chemical to, or the hormone to, do what it's supposed to do. So if you look at hormones as messengers, they're actually supposed to be, if everything's working like it should, you should have, let's say you're making testosterone. You make testosterone in one part of the body. That chemical then goes to a cell and it needs to fit into the cell receptor, and it attaches to that receptor and it delivers its message. You could almost look at it like an AirPod in your ear if you want to talk about EMFs. Uh, but you plug it in, it delivers its message, and then the body pulls it out, metabolizes it. It has to work through the liver, and then it goes out either through the kidneys or through the bowel. And that's how it's supposed to work. Endocrine disrupting chemicals are they are weak mimickers of these chemicals. So we have what are called chemical estrogens or estrogenic chemicals, and they'll go and they'll plug into the same receptor site that your testosterone or your progesterone or your estrogen would plug into, but they don't deliver a message, and then they don't want to leave. They're like an unwanted house guest or a 22-year-old son that won't move out of the basement, right? And so then we've got to go in and grab those guys out and detoxify that from the cell, because what happens at that point is there's cellular confusion. The body is trying to make a read as to what it's supposed to be producing, and part of that process is trying to figure out where it's going to send those hormones. But if the hormones are meant to be sent to these receptor sites and these receptor sites are clogged with something else, then it's like trying to plug an AirPod into ears that are covered. You can't get that message. So then the body starts to typically reduce supply of the hormone, particularly testosterone, because there's nowhere to put it. And what testosterone is being made is having a hard time delivering its message because, again, the receptors are blocked.
What are some of the chemicals or the things that are the biggest culprits? I mean, you've been talking about testosterone, so let's stay with that. But like, what are some of the biggest culprits for disrupting the ability of testosterone to adequately deliver its message to the cells?
So the way I like to look at it is more in categories, as opposed to talking about the chemicals themselves, because the
Mhm.
chemicals themselves aren't even typically listed on the package of a product. So from a consumer standpoint, if you're trying to say, okay, is there an endocrine disrupting chemical in this thing? Then you have to know what the chemical name is, and you have to rely on the company to actually list that. And interestingly enough, the laws that are so very stringent on what is listed on a food package, for instance, or a supplement package, are not nearly as strict when it comes to packages that have chemicals. So I was watching, we live in this world now where we don't have to watch commercials very often, but every once in a while, you might want to watch a movie on some streaming service that's got commercials, right? You got to sit through 2 minutes of commercials. Well, that happened to me the other night, and there were 5 commercials on, and 3 of the 5 commercials were for scented products. There was one for, I
Mm.
think, Gain, which is a laundry detergent. There was one for Febreze, which is an air freshener thing, and there was I think, a Glade plug-in or something like that. And anything with an artificial scent, that includes cologne, perfumes, laundry detergent, fabric softeners, makeup, or cosmetic products, all of those types of things that have artificial scent, scented candles, anything like that, are going to have estrogen mimicking chemicals in them. About the only
Mm.
way you can get around that is to go to natural scents that come from like essential oils from plants, that kind of thing. So if you want to make your house smell good or your laundry smell good, adding things like essential lemon oil, for instance, to your laundry would work without creating that issue. So the first place I always point is scented things. And we know that, and I deal with this a lot at Vitality because we have a lot of people that shop at our store that have become chemically sensitive. They can't handle things like that. I've had people have to walk out of my store when somebody else walks in that has a lot of perfume on, for instance, because it just immediately gives them a headache or makes them feel uh, otherwise stressed. We'll say there's a bunch of different potential side effects that can come from that. So we know we have people that are hypersensitive, but I think where the problem is we have a lot of people that don't recognize how sensitive they are because they're surrounded by this stuff every day, whether they're putting it on themselves or using it in their home, or they're going to the office or somebody else's home and it's there. And EWG, the Environmental Working Group, they did a study that indicates that if you clean up your act completely and get rid of all the endocrine disrupting chemicals, which means that you're basically going 100% natural and organic on all your body care stuff, nothing in your house is artificially scented. You're cleaning with water and vinegar instead of chemical cleaners and so on and so forth. If you clean it all up, you only get rid of like maybe 35 or 40%, or sorry, 55 or 60%. So you've got like 40% of those chemicals are being inflicted upon you just in your environment. And there's nothing you can do about that because you have to breathe in the air, right? So the first thing I
That's
think,
depressing. Thank you.
yeah, it's not great, right? And so the first thing is scented things, but also we know that things like aluminum cookware that has like PFOAs and I'm going to say the other one. I can never remember the other initials, but anyway, generally aluminum or nonstick cookware are going to have
Okay.
these things, and those have endocrine disrupting chemicals in them as well. There are a lot of things that are not scented in body care, parabens and phthalates and things like that, that are going to be endocrine disruptors as well. And then endocrine disrupting chemicals in pesticides and herbicides. And so if you're not eating organic food, then you're oftentimes getting these things. So there's a wide range of places that they come from. And one of the things I preach is to try not to get overwhelmed. You know, you said something really interesting. Well, that's kind of depressing. Well, it is, right? It's like, okay, well, how am I supposed to avoid this stuff? Well, you really can't avoid it entirely. And a lot of people get overwhelmed trying to avoid it at all because they hear someone like me talking about it and they're like, okay, so I got to change my laundry detergent. I got to change the way I clean my glass or my windows and my mirrors. I got to change this. I got to change that. And I recommend that you change all of those things. But every time the bottle runs out of the last thing you used, upgrade to the next thing and make these changes incrementally. And within a year or so, you've cleaned up your act a lot, and you don't necessarily have to experience the overwhelm or even the financial burden of just changing everything out in one shot.
I feel like also you could get obsessed with this.
For
You know,
sure.
like
For sure.
health and fitness is such a rabbit hole where you go into it and you're like, I want to lose 5 pounds. And then like a year later, you're like, there's xenoestrogens in tomatoes. You know, like you just like, you can go way, way deep in this stuff.
Yep.
So I like this. I like the idea of like, you finish your stuff out and when it's done, then we move on.
Yep.
So like we talked about scented stuff. What are some other things like besides like the laundry detergent, the Febreze, et cetera, that you would never, ever, ever have in your home?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I've been digging into this probably now for something like 15 years. And it's really, really interesting when I look back at what was in my home versus what is in my home
Mm-hmm.
and the changes I've made. And going back to this whole overwhelming thing, I think it's really important. It actually is kind of a minimalist way to live to some degree. And we talk about, a lot of people talk about minimalism and, only having a few outfits of clothing or having a tiny home or whatever. But it's really interesting how much less I spend because of how I clean my home now, because we use vinegar and we use water and sometimes we use a little bit of lemon oil and some baking soda, and that's pretty much it. We'll use borax in our laundry, and I save a ton of money on Tide and all those types of things. So it is kind of interesting when I look back. But the big things I would say are, I think that there is such a thing as nonstick cookware that's relatively safe. And I say that because we don't necessarily have studies of the stuff that they're using now for like your green cookware that a lot of people call it versus the things that those have replaced. So we may find that some of those things are toxic too. We'll find out, right?
Yeah.
Everybody knows about BPA in plastic, and BPA has been largely banned. It's no longer in your baby bottles and all these different things. But it was replaced with something called BPS, and what they found is that BPS is actually dramatically more toxic than BPA, but
That's
it
classic
doesn't
us.
it doesn't leach very much. So maybe it's safer because you're not getting very much of it. But if you were getting it, it'd be really dangerous. So
Oh man.
we're always going to discover stuff that are like, whoops, thought we had it right. We better adjust and move on. But I would say that the basic aluminum non-stick cookware is something that we've jettisoned out. Again, anything with a scent we've gotten rid of. We clean our home with those 4 or 5 things that I said across the board. And then the other thing that we use, because we've actually been able to get rid of more chemicals because of this, is we use, and I don't have a stake in this company, but anybody should look into this company, eCloth, where you can wash most things with just water. They have these really, really unique microfiber cloths that aren't very expensive. They last a long time, and you'll have the shiniest, cleanest mirrors and windows you've ever had with literally just water and a cloth. So a lot of it's just getting educated and figuring out what you can and what you can't. I'm a divorced guy. I'm married now, but my first wife, she was all about everything smelling fresh, which is hilarious because chemicals don't smell fresh to me, but whatever, right? So she wanted the Tide, and this is, I mean, 30 years ago that we got married, and I didn't know most of what I'm talking about right now back then, but she wanted the Tide. She wanted scented candles. She had different scents for every season, and I didn't know what what that was doing to us back then. So I was like, yeah, whatever, doesn't matter, until I started digging into it, like I say, maybe 15, 20 years ago, and said, whoops, we haven't been doing this right. So yeah, our house, I think it's pretty much chemical free. There's almost nothing that we put in there that I would say I'd be concerned about. We use all organic body care stuff. We do eat probably about 75% organic, or at least, grass fed, free range, that kind of stuff. And we did it piece by piece. We didn't do it all at once. We just moved through thing by thing and made adjustments as we went.
So we've gotten rid of all of our nonstick cookware. We have the hex-clad pans right now that I really like. My dad just got me like
I've heard good things about those.
They're good, and you can use metal utensils on them too, which is kind of nice. So we got rid of like the plastic spatulas. We got rid of the plastic cutting boards, most of the plastic cups.
Yeah, that was a pretty recent one for us. We're into wood cutting boards and wooden utensils. Yeah.
We got rid of the Febreze. I bought my wife like a diffuser for Christmas because I feel like I'd rather just like give her something that's going to replace her thing rather than try to be like, you shouldn't use that. We still use the Tide Pods in the dishwasher and in the laundry. What's your fix on that? Like, how do you structure your vinegar, lemon oil, water concoction there?
Laundry, we were making our own for a while, and honestly, busy, lazy, whatever. We actually now buy one from a company called Molly's Suds that works really, really well. I like that brand. And again, don't have a stake in that company, but they make good stuff. So we're using them. There's another one I really like that we just discovered, and I might have to dig for it, but I'd love to give your audience the name of it because I actually like it, I think, better than the Molly's stuff. But I can't remember the name right now. We just got it in and started using it. We like it a lot. So we are using one that's store-bought now, but it's interesting. It's not very expensive. I think we pay, well, I sell it in my store, so I get it for wholesale, but even at retail, I think it's like $25 for 90 loads or something like that. So it's not crazy. I don't know how that compares to Tide, but I don't think it's substantially more. And then in the dishwasher, we do use a pod, but it's, you're asking me about brands. I don't remember the brand name. I'll see if I can find that for you. And
it's a purely selfish question, by the way.
I'll send it to you, and you can throw it in the notes.
I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah, we have found a really good pod that we really like that's clean, but I can't think of the name of it right now.
Cool. A pod would be nice too. That way I can just swap like one for one.
Yeah.
You also mentioned using baking soda as a cleaning tool. Have you ever used baking soda or seen people use baking soda as a supplement?
Yeah. Some people use it for like kind of instant relief from acid reflux or heartburn, that kind of thing. And there's other benefits to it as well. Borax actually can be used as a supplement too, interestingly enough.
Interesting.
And vinegar, I don't recommend white vinegar as a supplement, but apple cider vinegar is one of my all-time favorite supplements. I have a whole show on apple cider vinegar on my podcast and all the various uses. That stuff is a wonder food.
I've been using the baking soda as a pre-workout before endurance events. So anytime I'm going like biking, swimming,
lactic acid.
Or jiu-jitsu, anything where I'm going to be doing like either long-term isometric holds or like trying to like push like maximum intensity and pace for a little bit. And I noticed a big difference with that.
Yeah.
I've also heard it was banned by the Olympic Committee.
Oh, I haven't heard that. That's interesting. Are you using an aluminum free?
I'm using Arm & Hammer.
Get an aluminum free baking soda.
This has been worth the price of admission right here.
Rumford is the brand. RUMFORD.
Okay.
Because that'll be a clean baking soda, and I don't have any problem with a clean baking soda, but there is aluminum in most baking soda, and you don't want that.
Okay, this has been excellent. Thank you so much. All right, and we're gonna get going today. No, I'm just kidding. Now I want to talk about we talked about toxicity. We talked about how bad it is for us. We're probably all going to die from it. You've really depressed us, Jared. Thank you. What can we do about this? You talk about replacing some of the products. Yeah. But like, how can we detoxify our already toxified bodies, especially when there's 40% of environmental toxins that we're never going to be able to touch because we literally breathe air?
Yeah, well, and it's a great question, and it really is the $1 million question with this, because you aren't avoiding all of it. period. I kind of jokingly say, I mean, if you want to live on a mountaintop in Costa Rica, you probably get rid of most of this stuff. But for most of us, we're stuck in some urban environment or suburban environment where we've got all this crap floating around. I'm in Utah, so just north of Salt Lake City, and we have 4 oil refineries within 5 miles of my store. And we're talking about those suckers just spewing this stuff over my head all day long. So I'm not getting rid of it unless I move away. And even if I move away, like I said, unless I move to some, incredibly remote place, we're stuck. So how do you get rid of it? Let me preface this really quickly, because I think your audience that hasn't heard these numbers, I'm hoping they'll motivate them to do a little bit more about this, because we hear about these kind of general statements of, this stuff's going to kill us and this is why, or whatever.
It feels like you're about to make us more sad. So yeah, go on.
Well, you're all about getting lean, right? And fit. And testosterone is a really, really, really big component of that, right? But for both men and women, that's important for people to remember as well. So we have a bunch of different numbers that I put together to share with your listeners here. Men aged 18 to 45 today often have lower testosterone than their fathers did at the same age, despite similar body types and lifestyle. In terms of sheer numbers, between 1987 and 2004. So keep in mind, this is 20 plus years ago that they did this study. But when 87 and 2004, roughly 1.2% drop in testosterone every single year in men on average in America. A 35-year-old man in 1987 had an average of 600 to 700 on his total testosterone numbers, and that average in 2004 was 450 to 500 for a 35-year-old. Now, I talked about, I'm 53 years old now. I had to think about that because that was like a week ago I turned 53.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. So 53 years old, and I remember when I never had guys in their 20s and 30s coming in complaining about low testosterone. And now, if I don't have a week go by that I don't have guys in their 20s and 30s complaining about low testosterone. At 53, I have people coming in their late 20s who have half the testosterone that I have, and that's just it was unheard of 20, 30 years ago. And I believe it is almost exclusively because of what's happening in the environment. And so when we think about that, we have to remember that not only is testosterone critical for muscle building, but also for fat loss, of course, obviously for libido, sexual performance, gym performance, all that kind of stuff, but also just general feeling of well-being. We all feel better if we have enough testosterone, mentally, emotionally, all of that kind of stuff. It's all very, very important, and it has very powerful anti-aging benefits as well. So we don't want to mess around with low testosterone. And I used to never have women come in ever that had low testosterone, and now, believe it or not, I don't know if you've seen this, but you have the reference range in blood tests. Mm-hmm. And so they'll say, like, a guy in his late 40s with a typical blood test with testosterone, they'll say the reference range is 300 to 800. So 300 to 800. Well, first off, that reference range is insane, right? That's a 500-point range, and that's all normal. So if you're at 301 or you're 799, you're in the normal range. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. But the women's range on free testosterone starts at 0. Now, how is that even, like, it makes no sense. So we can't even necessarily count on blood tests if they're saying, well, you're fine if you have 0 free testosterone.
Yeah, if you had -1, that's a big issue.
Yeah, that's a real problem. Exactly. So the ranges are all out of whack anyway. And I actually have a whole podcast on that too, if anybody wants to jump in. I actually interviewed my naturopathic medical doctor about that and talk about the reference ranges versus what he believes the real ranges ought to be. And it's actually a pretty fascinating conversation.
It's if you want to check that out, check out the Vitality Radio podcast to hear more of Jared's stuff. He's got how many episodes have you done?
I think we're about 550 episodes of the podcast. I started out on local radio for like 16 years. So I've done a million.
So you're an OG.
Shows, but
you were podcasting before we even called it that.
Yeah. I was a little late to the podcasting game, actually, only about 6 years ago, but I got a bunch. I do 2 a week. So it's adding up pretty quick. But anyway, those numbers should be shocking to everybody. There's a whole bunch of other numbers as well. But so what do we do about it? Remember at the very beginning, I talked about how the system's supposed to work. And I do this in very, simple layman's terms. You don't have to understand the biochemistry necessarily, but it is really simple. If we have an endocrine disrupting chemical in our receptors, and we all do, we have probably thousands and thousands and thousands of these endocrine disrupting chemicals blocking cell receptors, and they aren't willing to leave on their own, then we have to actually metabolize them and get them to go. Our body doesn't naturally have a process to make that happen on its own. The good news is nature has provided a process, and that is through three specific phytochemicals that are found in nature. One is called indole 3 carbonyl, also known as I3C. One is called DIM. That's the one that probably people are the most familiar with, that comes from cruciferous vegetables. Well, both of those come from cruciferous vegetables. And one is called calcium deglucrate. Those three things actually have the ability, and they all do it a little bit differently, but to essentially unlock that chemical from the cell receptor. And then, as long as your liver is doing what it's supposed to do, and you're not constipated, because you have to have things able to go out the back door, then we can get rid of these things and we can start to move the needle. And this is what's really, really fascinating to me. So years ago, we started kind of discovering all this stuff here at Vitality, and we started really seeing the need. We had more and more guys coming in, younger and younger, and then more and more women coming in saying, hey, my testosterone's off the charts low, I feel terrible, I have no energy, and so on and so forth. And so we started really digging into it, trying to figure out how to help them. And we knew a little bit about it back then, but as we started educating ourselves, we recognized a few things. One is that the first thing a guy would typically come in for when they have low testosterone was something to boost testosterone. They wanted something that was pro testosterone. And so herbs like tribulus or tonkat ali or fedosia or things like this would be what people,
horny goat weed, deer antler spray.
all these types of things, right? Nothing wrong with boosting testosterone. I'm all for that. But think about it. If we're boosting testosterone, making more to go to more receptors that are still clogged, we're kind of creating more of a log jam than we're necessarily creating the ultimate benefit that we're looking for. So then we found that we still do this every day at Vitality, we would spend 10 or 15 minutes having this conversation with each of these customers and saying, okay, first off, I understand you want higher testosterone, but let's understand why you don't have high testosterone in the first place. And we'd explain that. And then we'd recommend detoxifying the endocrine system, and then seeing what the body could do when it was essentially clean, the plate had been cleared. And then if they need to boost testosterone after that, look at that as the next option. And that's typically how I look at it, because ultimately I think the body just needs stuff to be out of the way that's damming up the production of things that we need, and it needs to be fortified with the nutrition that it needs to make the things that we need. So as long as we get rid of the stuff that's hindering production and we fortify with the stuff that creates more production or gives the body the ability to produce, then the body tends to kind of do what it's supposed to do, right? And so we started seeing people that weren't adding anything pro testosterone to their diets, but were just detoxifying the endocrine system, start to get raises of 100, 150, 200 points in testosterone, simply because they're just cleaning the plate and letting the body do what the body does when there's not all this crap in the way. And so the first thing is detox, get that stuff open. So I recommend a good 30 to 60 day liver detox. There's a bunch of different ways you can do that. We have a formula that I developed called Liver Vitality that is specifically designed to detoxify the liver through phase 1 and 2 and open things up. If you deal with constipation, meaning you're not going and having a good bowel movement at least once per day, and optimally a couple times per day at least, then you got to get that cleared up. So there's a bunch of different ways to do that, but this show's not about laxatives, but I can help you with that too if you have questions about that. And I have shows that we talk about that on Vitality Radio. But make sure that your bowels are moving, make sure you're drinking plenty of water, and then do a good, simple liver detox. I recommend detoxifying the liver kind of like you would look at spring cleaning your house. Once or twice a year for a couple of months, just make sure you're giving your liver support, because some of the things that people don't recognize about the liver, all of this stuff has to leave through the liver. And we already talked about the chemical stew that we're swimming in, right? But on top of that, Tylenol, which is one of the most commonly used drugs in America, is the number one cause of acute liver failure in America, way ahead of alcohol. It's not even close. And
Wow.
many of us are eating Tylenol on a pretty regular basis. So if you are, I would suggest finding an alternative. But also, if you have been doing that,
Ibuprofen fall into that same camp?
say that again.
Does ibuprofen fall into that same camp?
Actually, no. Ibuprofen's relatively, I'm not going to say it's good for the liver, but it's not super liver toxic like
More
Tylenol is.
benign.
But it's
Okay.
not great for the kidneys and it's terrible for the stomach. So it's like, you're sort of trading one
Pick your
for the other.
poison.
Yeah. So optimally, you're using natural anti-inflammatory stuff, omega-3s and turmeric and boswellia and things like that. But if you have found that you've been relying on a lot of Tylenol, then your need for liver detoxification is even higher. And if you're going to continue using Tylenol, then I would recommend actually doing some gentle liver detox every single day just to support the liver doing its thing. And the way to do that would be like NAC, which is N-acetylcysteine. It's an amino acid, maybe some dandelion root. Just real simple stuff you can take daily. Neither one of them costs very much money, and they're really good for you for a bunch of different reasons.
Milk thistle also, would you include in there or not? Not so
I
much.
love milk thistle, but I don't love it daily. I think it's actually a little harsh on the body to do daily, but I love it in a 1 or 2 months, couple times a year, and it is in my liver vitality formula. So there probably isn't a better liver detoxifier. It's just a little too strong for a daily basis, in my opinion. So if you do the liver detoxification, then the next stage is, and I typically recommend you can do this together. You can start on both of them at the same time, or you can do a month of liver detox and then move into endocrine detox. It's really up to you, kind of personal preference. We have a formula called EndoCleanse. There are several pretty good formulas out on the market, but the EndoCleanse has those 3 ingredients, the DIM, the indole 3-carbonyl, and the calcium deglucrate, along with other things that are supportive of liver detoxification. And I'll just say hormone balance is probably the best way to talk about that. And you have to do at least 3 to 4 months if you've never done it before on a good endocrine system cleanse, because you have to think you've been stacking this stuff up for a long, long time. 1 month isn't enough. Our anecdotal results, because we just talk to real people doing this every day, are that after a month, most women that are doing this, doing the liver detox and the endocrine detox, are starting to find if they're still premenopause and they are having a regular period, they're finding that their PMS symptoms are substantially less intense. Sometimes the period's lasting less long. There's less cramping, less mood disruption, all that type of stuff. The second month, the period is even better. By the third month, they found just this really nice balance. But usually energy is better. Usually brain fog is better in both men and women. And it's easier for women to see the biggest changes because they have that monthly cycle where the hormones being disrupted really wreak havoc on things. And this applies to your 16-year-old daughter too. This isn't just for women in their 30s and 40s and so on.
Thank God she's only 7.
I have a 16-year-old daughter. So and it applies to your 14-year-old son, right? So like once these kids get into puberty, I think it's a really good idea to consider regular detoxification of the endocrine system. Even
what's your like schedule on that? Like, is it once a year, or is it more often if you feel like you've got some real big issues, or if you've been working in a chemical plant for a while?
Well, I always preface all of these types of answers with this.
Sure.
We don't have great clinical support to say that you need to do it twice a year for 2 months or once a year for 3 months. We have a lot of anecdotal evidence. We have a ton of clinical evidence that this works. Like, it's very clear that those 3 ingredients do what they're supposed to do. It's very clear that the liver is where all this stuff has to go through. All that stuff I'm saying is very proven in human studies. But what we don't know yet is just on a sheer volume of detoxification, how often you're doing it or how intensely you're doing it, how much is optimal. So what I've come up with, just based on my observations over the last 15 or so years that we've been looking at this, is at least 3 months every year of a good endocrine system detox with at least 2 months of liver detoxification. I personally do a month of liver detox at the beginning of the year and a month of liver detox at the middle of the year. And then I do a couple of months of endocrine detox with those detoxes. So basically like January, February, I'm doing that. And July, August is kind of how I do it. I'm leaning because, and actually we're working on this very comprehensive protocol, my wife and I, that we've been working on for over a year now, specific to not just detoxification of the endocrine system, but also refortification of the endocrine system to really get everything firing like it's supposed to. And I think I may end up doing this basically every 3 months. So 3 months on, 3 months off. So half the year I'm doing this. I don't think you can really overdo it per se, other than financially, you might spend a little more money than you need to. But in terms of harm, I'm not seeing it. And the world is getting not cleaner, right? And so it's how do we keep up with it? And I think to a large degree, it's that N of one thing you were talking about. You have to test it out on yourself and see how your body does.
Yeah, plus, we're rolling back a lot of the EPA things around corporations of what they can and can't put into the water. So
Yeah,
be
it's
careful
it's
out there.
it's possible things actually do get better, but
We'll see.
we'll see. It's up to politicians, right?
Yeah, and you can trust that they have our best interest in mind.
100%. Yes, we certainly have noticed
we've seen
that.
that over and over again. They care about us.
Yep.
Okay. And so like everything you just said was confusing and terrifying. I'm assuming, do you have a cheat sheet on this or like somewhere we can go on your website and like kind of go back through this, take like a more measured approach, find all the compounds you're talking about?
You know what I'll do? I'll be happy to send you some stuff after the fact that you can. I'll send you a link.
Cool.
I have. I don't think it's up yet, but it's done. I just have got to put it on my blog on our website. Essentially, this conversation in a blog post, sort of explaining what it is, why it is, how it works, and then what to do. So I'll be happy to send you a link to that, and you can share that with your listeners. And then we are, kind of stay tuned, I guess, I'm going to say, I don't want to promise anything because there's a couple of little things that are kind of holding this up right now. But I think October, November, certainly by the end of the year, we'll be rolling out the other half. I talked about liver vitality and Endo Cleanse, but we're also going to be rolling out a product called Endo Energize and one called Endo Elevate for men and one called Endo Elevate for women. The elevates are the hormone optimizers, basically the boosters of proper hormone production. And the Endo Energize is designed to balance what's called the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenals. That also includes the thyroid to make sure all of that stuff is communicating like it should. And that's the project we've been working on for the last year. We're actually writing a book on this topic, which we're about 70% done with. We're hoping to have that done by the end of the year as well. And the book will include what's the problem and where does it come from? So the beginning of this conversation, but in great detail, where we'll specifically spell out all the different categories, everything from what you're doing in your yard to what you're doing in your kitchen to what you're doing in your bathroom to what you're putting on your body. And then what are the good replacements for those things that actually work, that we've seen positive results with, to the discussion of why it's such an issue, everything from early puberty to infertility to low sperm counts and all that stuff. And then we'll talk about, how to detoxify from this stuff and how to optimize your system through natural means from a combination of diet, exercise, and supplementation. So that all of that stuff is coming out around the end of this year.
Cool. Good teaser. Jared, this has been fascinating. You're a wealth of information. Obviously, it's clear to me that you've done this once or twice before. So thank you so much for taking the time to drop some of your wisdom, share it on the show here. How can people follow up with you? Where can they find you on either the social media or website? I know that we talked about Vitality Radio.
Yeah, Vitality Radio podcast with Jared St. Clair is the full name, and that's on all your podcast apps. So real easy to find there. That's where you're gonna get the most detailed information. If you want to check out our website, it's vitalitynutrition.com. And one thing that I throw out there that makes us a little bit unique, we're still an independent family business. We still answer the phone and take calls from anybody across the country. So you can call us if you have questions about this at 801-292-6662. I have a great team that's very well educated and can help you out. And if they don't know the answer, they come to me and we get you the answer. So that's an option for you as well. And then on social media, the most active place is Instagram with at Vitality Nutrition Bountiful. It's kind of long, but that's our Instagram handle. You see me on Facebook as well. Same thing, at Vitality Nutrition Bountiful. So those are the best places to find me on the socials.
Awesome. Last question. Just give me your answer here. No explanation at all.
All right.
What's your favorite supplement?
Magnesium bisglycinate.
Wow. Okay.
Yep.
I love it. We've got to go look that up now. That's on you. You heard it here first. We're not telling you why that's his favorite, though. All right. Thanks, Jared. Appreciate you, man.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate you.